Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of Alien Astrobiology Lessons for an Interdisciplinary Education Network. This is episode 4, Music. And we're so excited to be talking with our wonderful interviewee. But first, I'm just going to introduce myself. I'm one of your co-hosts. My name is Ariel. I'm an undergraduate student at Arizona State University studying biomedical sciences and data science. I really love astrobiology. I love interdisciplinary collaboration. And I'm here with my co-host.
Hi, I'm Emily. I'm also an undergrad student at Arizona State University. I'm majoring in astrobiology, passionate about the same exact things, and I'm super excited for today's episode.
Awesome. So today we're going to be talking with Alexander Skelton, a young composer, trombonist, and collaborator from Flagstaff, Arizona. As an ambitious and inquisitive individual, Alex sees his work as the crafting and blossoming of experiences, aiming to create works that challenge both him and the listener's perspectives. Currently pursuing degrees in music composition and trombone performance at Arizona State University, Alex's diverse projects demonstrate his drive to create works that reinforce and challenge his compositional practice. He finds collaborating with other artists invigorating and loves to give back to the artists and communities that enrich our everyday lives. He has worked extensively in collaboration with the Flagstaff Community Band, the 2025 DBR Lab, and many other aspiring and talented young musicians at ASU. Alex has composed for a variety of groups, ranging from smaller chamber works to larger ensembles. As a collaborator, he hopes to continue building meaningful relationships through his music. Alexander is an artist because he believes that his work can foster remarkable experiences and connections that expand beyond the world of music. So thank you so much for being here, Alex.
Of course, I'm happy to be here. This is a wonderful opportunity to be able to talk about what I do, but I think also to apply it to a different area that we usually don't see music go to. So I'm excited to see what we can come away from this.
Awesome.
I'm excited too. I guess to begin, we'll start off with how is music a form of communication?
That's a great question. And in fact, there are so many ways we can view music as a form of communication. There's kind of two main things I want to talk about within it. We can talk about the communication between the people making the music, but we can also talk about the overall communication of the performers and then the listeners or the audience. Starting off at the first point, there's so many different levels of communication. If we're looking at, like, let's say you're sitting in a symphony orchestra and you're performing a piece, there's a lot of levels of communication going on there. Um, for example, I play trombone. I have to communicate with the two people beside me to first of all like match with their pitch, their intonation, make sure we're matching up. Furthermore, we also have to match with other sections. So we can look at like the trombone section. They have to match with the trumpets and the horns and the nearby instruments. That's all these micro communications happening constantly when you're performing music. You can also look at the communication between the ensemble and the conductor who's directing the music and is trying to give key forms to show what needs to happen at different points. You know, a conductor needs to show the music growing, shrinking, speeding, slowing, all of those little things that we take for granted. The conductor has to show that, and then the musicians have to pick up on that. So I would say that communication is sort of integral in music. It's essential in it. You can't have music without communication. When we're looking at an ensemble and an audience, there's a sort of different communication going on. Um, the ensemble is usually right, they're performing a piece that the audience is taking in. Sometimes it's interactive, sometimes it's not, and you're just listening. Um, Usually, what happens though with a lot of music is that music is trying to send a message. Um, like, for example, what if a love song is trying to talk about love and they're trying to convey a story? One of my favorite symphonies is Scheherazade, which is this beautiful story about this woman who gets captured by this evil sultan, and she tells him stories every night for 1,000 days. And the music perceives that, and it shows off that story. Um, So when we're looking at these kind of communications between ensembles and audience, it's usually there's a point, and it can even be political sometimes, or it can also be scientific. It depends what the music was made to do, and it's our job as musicians to convey that to the audience, and hopefully the audience will take something away from that.
Wow, that is so cool. I really like everything you put out there, especially the idea that music is communication on many different levels and in many different dimensions. But like between musicians, between conductor, musician, musicians and audience. I think that oftentimes we really do view communication as this like one-dimensional thing, oftentimes that only involves speech. But even if we were just like applying this to like the conversation we're having, our body language is saying so much, like the inflection and our tone and everything like that. So like anybody who is maybe like a little bit more unfamiliar with the process of like creating music, playing music, like it's so much like just talking, but it's just talking in a different way. And if we were to think about how we might communicate with creatures that are so different from us that we don't even know like how they communicate among themselves. I mean, that's such an it's a challenge that feels insurmountable, but if we do think about different forms of communication, I think we can kind of like expand our like collective neural network to figure out that problem. Um, and that's super cool. And then this idea that music is so integral to culture, like you mentioning the story of Scheherazade and how music can tell that story along with words. And like, what sorts of cultures might we encounter as we search for extraterrestrial life? How do they convey stories to each other? Do they convey stories to each other? Stories are such a big part of being human. I really do like to wonder what that's like for other creatures. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to go on to the next question here. Do you know of any concepts that bridge the gap between music and STEM?
That's a great question as well. And I think there again is kind of two things we can look at here. We can talk sort of about the science of what music is and kind of what the physics are of it and how that gets created and how composers can use that to their advantage when creating something. But we can also talk about just sort of more just collaboration. And I'll talk about that first because I think it's kind of a more straightforward one. Is what a composer that I know, and actually one of my professors, is was working on this saxophone piece where I think he was working. It was some environmental thing, maybe with like trees and restoration and things like that. And he was partnering with this. I don't remember the group, but he was partnering with a group to kind of in a way promote their research and promote the initiatives that they were doing. So he was writing a piece for them about the research they were doing. So one of the things I think music can really do to bridge the gap with STEM and sort of almost enhance STEM is to show it off, to broadcast it, and kind of to push the information forward. It can serve as a way to, in a way, advertise the research being done. Um, and I think music it can do a very good job of that if done correctly. And in terms of more the scientificness of music, um, when we break it down, music is all science. I mean, you have the sound waves vibrating, and different collections of different sound waves create different sounds, and the frequencies and the amplitudes all change different things with music. Um, I think one of the I'll save a lot of the sciencey talk because it's kind of crazy. But one of the most influential things is the overtone series, which is this sort of like fundamental algorithm of pitches that are kind of developed. And how it works is let's say you have a metaphorical string here. And if you were to pluck that string, it would make a pitch. And we call that pitch the fundamental. What we can do is we can actually divide that string in half. And if we pluck it again, it will sound exactly one octave higher. if you're speaking in terms of frequency, that means that the hertz is going to be double. So if you have a 440 string and you then cut it in half and you do it, it's going to be an 880 hertz vibration. And there's this sort of mathematical thing we can do with it. We can do one half. What if we do one third of the original string? That's going to be an octave and a fifth. We could do one fourth, and that's two octaves. And there's just this, and it keeps going. You can do one fifth, and I think it's an octave and a third, a major third, and this just goes on forever. But one of the really cool things about it is if you put these notes together in this series, they line up really well and they sound very consonant and they sound very nice. So if we want a nice sounding sort of thing, with music, we can kind of follow that series, whether to keep it well spaced and to have the very nice and resonant sound, or we can do the opposite, and go off of that series and make a more dissonant sort of sound. Um, it's just one of the ways that me as a composer, I like to think of music scientifically. And I think that helps to be able to create clarity in music, but also knowing when you can take away that clarity, because that gives a different effect.
Oh my gosh, that is like the coolest thing I've ever heard in my life. That is so cool. Oh my God. Okay. I'm wow. Yeah. So I mean, this is such a big part of like what we're trying to do here is like how do these concepts that may seem in the mainstream like pretty distinct, how do they overlap? And that is such a great way to describe it. Like Alex thinks of music scientifically. That is how he composes music well. And other people think of it in a different way. But this is a way for him to communicate. So that's really cool. Emily, I don't know if you have anything to add to this.
Yeah, I mean, I actually really, really liked your explanation of like the frequencies and everything. And it makes me think about, for example, if we were to come into contact with some extraterrestrial life, maybe intelligence, how would we be able to communicate with them using these frequencies? Like, would that be an option? And that's something that I've always thought about as a music lover myself. Like, we can for sure try to send a piece of music up there that we absolutely love to try to communicate, which I think is super interesting. And I also really, really loved your explanation by saying that music can also very well be a form of science communication. And I think that's super, super interesting. Ariel, I don't know if you want to add anything else before we move on, but yeah.
Oh, you're good. Yeah, I totally agree with you, Ellie. That's a cool thing that you said about how like this is communication that we could put into practice in that way. And um like there's like things like the Fibonacci sequence or something that really sort of like delve into our math, and we perceive math as the universal language of the universe a lot of the time. Um, these series that like take forms like this, like that can very well be such a great way to communicate. And I mean, it's certainly been done, but like needs to be like explored more, I believe. And it's just really, really cool. I'm kind of gobsmacked, to be honest. Um, but yeah, we could definitely go on to the next question.
Of course. Okay. Next question is, as a composer, what concepts do you try to get across to your audience, and how do you do that through music?
Yeah, so honestly, it depends on the piece I'm trying to write. I can give some examples of pieces I've written and what I've done to bring across different things. Um, but yeah, I'll just jump into some pieces. One of the pieces I recently composed was called Old World Blues, and it was a trombone solo with fixed media, and that's a fancy way of just saying backing track of electronics that had certain elements that was embedded with the trombone. And with Old World Blues, what I really wanted to do is I wanted to touch on the emotion of nostalgia, how it can be a very warming thing, but how it can also be uh, kind of dangerous. You can get stuck in sort of an echo chamber. It can make you sad. It's in the name, Old World Blues. Um, and there's also the whole thing of just not remembering stuff as it was, and that can lead to delusion. So I had these themes that I wanted to kind of create in this piece, and I did that in multiple ways. One of the ways I did that is in the track I used different um, sort of vocal stuff. I recorded myself kind of speaking in a transatlantic accent, and I embedded over it some effects to make it sound like an old radio host talking about things. Um, some other things I did to bring in nostalgic qualities to the music is, of course, the trombone is kind of seen as a very jazzy instrument. Um, it was used in big bands. It's used in all sorts of things in the 20th century. So I wanted to bring some of that in. So I wrote a melody that sounded very much like big band. I mean, if you listen to Tommy Dorsey, similar sort of thing. And I used a mute that was kind of reminiscent of that sound. A mute is it's sort of an object we insert into the bell of the trombone to block some sounds, and it changes the color that comes out of the instrument. So I used a combination of those things to give a very old, retro kind of old sound to show off sort of this reminiscent sounding piece. The other thing that I did is I used some lyrics in one part. That and sort of the lyrics, it followed a standard jazz tune, but it was called Rose Tinted Glasses. And it was about living in a world of rose tinted glasses and sort of like remembering, oh, stuff was so much good back then, and look how amazing this was. But sort of playing into the fact that you don't really remember what it was like, and your mind is constantly changing your past and how you think of it. So that's some of the things I did with that piece. Um, some of the other things I do is I try to set a mood, depending what I want the piece to be about. A piece that I wrote in my first year here at ASU was called The Science of Human Improvement, and I talked about the dangers of eugenics and sort of the ideas of eugenics coming back to the mainstream world, especially right now. So things I tried to do is I tried to create an atmosphere that was creepy, and lurking in the shadows. So I used instruments that were kind of reminiscent of that. I used violin and violas and cellos, and I used some effects with that to make it sound kind of looming and dark. I used some very hard metallic um, mallet percussion to kind of give this mechanical sort of machination sound. To kind of give it this, it's sort of like raw creation, but almost like tempering with things that shouldn't be tempered with. Um, you know. So those are some things that I've done in my pieces, and it depends what you're doing per piece. I sit down and I'm like, what sounds do I want, and what instruments can I use to fit that sound and the style that I'm trying to create?
Wow, that's awesome. And I like how I think I mean, you mentioned before that music can be political. Um, but it is really cool how, I mean, both of your examples, like this is, I mean, to me that this very much seems like a form of activism through music, like putting these really important issues out there and advertising them, like you said before, how music can be super effective in that way. Issues that are important to you personally, that are important to the world currently that you are expressing through your music. And you can do that through, like, it doesn't have to be any sort of like statement that's made. It can be like that the tone seeps into people who are listening and makes them feel a certain way about a certain topic, which is really interesting. And that in and of itself can be a statement. Um, and I mean, it doesn't have to be that way, but it is interesting how it can be that way. And I think that's really cool. I think we can use these concepts to wonder about I mean, not only communication with potential aliens, because there's, so many facets to music, as we've spoken about before, but also just communication between people. Like, we really struggle to communicate across various
Mhm.
divides. I mean, obviously. And I mean, especially I think within today's climate in the nation the three of us live in, United States, like it's very hard to like have conversations and arguments that are like more productive than they are um, circular. So it's really cool to think about how music can actually do that in a way that kind of like sneaks up on you and actually makes you think and feel something.
Yeah.
Um, I had like psychology class last year, and one of the things we talked about was various theories of like how you start to think and feel things like mentally, physiologically when something happens. So one theory was that you feel something first, like you feel your heart rate go up before you think, oh, that was a bad thing, or this is exciting, or I'm nervous about this. And then another thing is like you think that first, and then your body experiences that response. Um, and so these are just like different theories. And I think music, at least for me, it really makes me feel things very physically. I get the chills when I listen to music a lot of the time. And like my heart will start beating faster, or I'll feel this like very palpable sense of calm. And it's interesting because I don't really get that a lot from speech. If I'm just having a conversation with somebody, regardless of how like profound that conversation is. I mean, sometimes I'll get the chills when someone says something really cool, but um, music is what really does it for me. Like, especially if I'm watching a film or any, like, it just really, really drives in those emotions. And, you know, people will forget what you say and what you do, but they'll never forget how you make them feel. I think if we're trying to
Mm.
communicate concepts like forcefully, music is the way to do it. I really do think that. So I really like those examples. Emily, if you have anything to add, you can feel free or we can move on.
Yeah, I did have I like snatched one of your points where you basically connected like the instrumentation and the production, and then on top of that there could be the lyricism that can really tie in together just one piece of music. Like it all has a theme, and you base everything off of a mood or a feeling that you have. And I think it's so cool to build off of just an emotion so that you can create that through music. And I just thought that was super interesting because I feel like especially a lot of different composers and producers, they have their way of working, but I feel like at the end of the day, there's always going to be something tying it back to the root of it all, which is the emotion.
Mhm.
And that's super interesting to me, and I absolutely love it. So that's all I have to add, but thank you for your response.
Awesome. So our next question is, in your experience, how has communication through music been more effective than other verbal or any other types of communication?
I think a lot of things. Actually, we were just talking about it. You were talking about movies, and music's kind of implementation in that. And I just wanted to talk about that a bit. If you've ever seen like those clips of like from horror movies where they take away the music and it's really not as scary, or there's other ones where like it could be like a love scene, with no love music going on, and it's not the same. I think that's one of the things that music can do. It can subtly enhance different aspects of what's going on. And it's very good at doing that, I think. Um, One of the other things I see it as, I and I actually I'll go back to that. I just the subtleness of music, I think, is what I think it's very good at with communication. I mean, you can look at other forms of communication, like the nonverbal stuff, of maybe how you're looking at someone, how you're holding yourself, um, and things like that, or even your tone quality in your voice. Those are all different forms of communication. Everything you do really kind of impacts what people view you as, depending how you're carrying yourself and what you're doing. And I think music is an extension of that. I think, for example, one of the things I love is in the 60s with more like McCarthy era songs. There was a lot of singer-songwriters who used music as a form of defiance and a form of protest. But their songs weren't just very straightforward of like, we don't like this, we're going to protest. They were very subtle, in a way, because if a song was too violent or too straightforward, they wouldn't let it play on the radio. So they would make these themes very, very subtle. One of the ones I've been listening to recently is If I Had a Hammer. And just one of the lyrics I really like is it's like, if I had a hammer, I would hammer in the morning, I would hammer in the evening all over this land. I would hammer out danger, I would hammer out of warning, and I would hammer out a love between the brothers and the sisters all over this land. Um, Clearly, there's not any specific thing that it's protesting, but I think in a way, it's subtly talking about some of the inequalities and things that were happening at the time. Um, I think that's just for me, yeah, the subtlety of music. Um, and the ways it can do that through communication, I think, are very interesting and very important.
Totally. That's really cool because sometimes we think of music as being like something that can be extremely dramatic and intense and forceful, and it can be, but when we are watching those movies or something, like it builds, like that's how we feel it so viscerally is the building of it and kind of that can like totally fall by the wayside. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, and I do want to add, I really liked your example with the hammer, and I think for it to begin so subtly and also evolve over time just within music for it to get louder and louder each time, like each decade just gets more and more in your face, and I absolutely love it because the subtlety basically paved the way for subgenres and just all these things for us to again go back into the idea that it's a form of protest, that we can talk about things that are political. And so I think it's super cool that these people basically set it up for us in future generations. And it's amazing. I love it. Moving forward, do you think music is a hallmark of advanced civilization? And do you have any bare knowledge on music through the ages?
I think a lot of that depends on what you define as an advanced civilization. Um, if you were to say like, oh, like post-industrial civilizations are advanced, I don't think so. I mean, you had music much before that, um, that served in different ways. If we're talking more about advanced civilization as like kind of like Mesopotamia and like roots of, people settling down and starting that, I think you could argue that. Um, but I'm taking a music history course right now, and one of the first things we talked about of the evidence that we have of music emerging was actually these bone flutes, um, not with humans, but actually Neanderthals. And it's kind of new research, but people are starting to see that maybe actually Neanderthals were capable of creating music. And if you, just to think about what would have to happen for that, I mean, these people were drilling into these bones holes, um, and figuring out how to blow through it to be able to make a sound. And figuring out that different holes and holding down different things create different pitches. That is extremely complex, and more complex than what we thought Neanderthals were capable of. Um, and I guess the danger slippery slope about that, with advanced civilization, is you get into the discourse of what music is advanced and what music is not. And that is very slippery because it can lead to a lot of dangerous decisions that can undermine types of music that are not mainstream. Especially if we're looking at sort of the dominant narrative of white European music kind of being the like main focal point, we're losing a lot of music from other cultures that in a way were even more advanced, than European music through the decades, or not through the decades, but through the ages. So it's difficult if we're talking about humanity as a whole, as an advanced civilization, as in like getting to the point, where we're able to survive like this and use music. I think it is. But it really does depend on the definition of what an advanced civilization is. And that's one of the slippery slopes with music is you can't start calling certain types of music complex and then other stuff not complex. That's a dangerous topic to go down.
Okay, that's really interesting. I know that like formulating this question, it was more thought of humanity as a whole compared to other ET life. But when you do think about like what are some of the judgments that we as humans could pass in the future upon ET life if these are already judgments that we constantly like are constantly like an undercurrent through how people perceive music, European music versus other types of music. Um, very much so like there's such a sense of superiority and like different versions of whatever complexity like is to you in your personal life, very different from somebody else. And like complexity is such a hard thing to define culturally. Um, which is interesting. Emily and I took an astrobio course together last semester. That's how we met. And a lot of the class was spent defining complexity in a
Mm.
scientific sense. Thinking about it culturally is really interesting, especially because this whole interview is about how to connect with like organisms we have no idea um, how they communicate. Like that's culture.
Mm.
So wow, that does give us a lot to think about. Um, wow, sorry, I'm like this is really interesting, Emily. If you have anything to add, I'm definitely like gathering my thoughts.
No, for sure. Me too. I'm on the same boat. I think this kind of just solidifies the fact that like there's just so many unknowns still that we need to just go into and research, but there's a lot of things that we still need to be super duper careful about when just even talking about the potential first contact with extraterrestrial life. And it's super interesting that it's all very extensive and also complex. But I think that's what makes it so beautiful is that it's just a lot of it is just we can't really understand it that well yet. So yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. Super, I mean, complex, right? Super complex. And another thing that like ties into that is, that whole conversation around like who gets to represent humanity and nations with more money, you know, like those are the people that are currently, it's just like it's all like billionaires can fund space exploration or not space exploration, but space tourism. Sorry, that was me slipping up. But like they can also fund space exploration. Like things happen because of money, they happen because of power, and like
Mhm.
it's very concerning and like it's an ethical issue about how like the cultures on this world are so varied and different and the ways we communicate are so varied and different and just putting one version of ourselves out there is a deep ethical problem that has consequences not just for the concept of first contact but for just us as humanity if we really want to grow into a version of ourselves that could be a contributing member of some sort of universal like cosmic network. That's very, to me, that is very unadvanced of us to refuse to allow, you know, other forms of ourselves to be represented. Um, and it's very sad and concerning. So I'm really glad that you brought that up, Alex, is how we think about that in terms of like between cultures here on Earth within humanity.
Yeah.
That's really cool. Um, to a next question, we are sort of like coming to the end of our time here. In a nutshell, with your experience in mind, why do you think we as humans play and or listen to music?
I think it incites certain emotions in us that are fulfilling. Um, I think, in a way, I think music completes me. Um, I feel things when I write and play music that I can't feel otherwise. And I think that's with a lot of people with music. And I think that's why it's so ingrained in our culture today. Whether you're listening to your favorite artists, or you're performing in a concert hall, or even if you're passing by the street and you hear some live music performed. I think I think in a way it inspires the best of us, and I think it says things that we can't say with speech. I think that's one of the beautiful things about music is it can do that.
That's gorgeous.
All right, our final question is, do you have any examples of interdisciplinary collaboration working wonders in the music field and or another field via contributions from music?
Some of the things I see a lot, especially with music in terms of interdisciplinary work, is across fine arts genres. I've seen a good amount of music collaborations with dance studios, music collaborations with art, and even like, of course, one of the most mainstream is film and animation. But I mean, you can think of video games. There's a lot of collaborations going on with music, around us. And I think in a way there could definitely be more. Um, I mean, and one of the things we talked about earlier with STEM, I definitely think we could see more collaborations of music with STEM. And I think there could be a lot of beneficial things to come out of that. And probably a lot of that right now is funding. Um, I mean, I think people are having issues funding their own projects right now in research. How are you going to do that on top of then collaborating with musicians or a composer, or other sorts of stuff like that? That adds a whole other level of complexity and also a whole other level of things that need to be funded. Um, but those are some of the main interdisciplinary things I see right now. Um, yeah,
That's awesome. And you did also talk about like politics and stuff, and there's just so much weaving through music and that music can weave into. Because again, like communication is how we operate with each other, and music is communication.
yeah,
It's a very profound form of it, as you mentioned. So,
for
um,
sure.
yeah, I mean, Emily, if you have any closing remarks before we sort of end off our episode here.
Not at all. My last little comment was how much I absolutely love music and how it's basically its own language at this point.
Oh,
And it's
100%.
just, yeah, and it's so amazing being able to tie just everything together. So, yeah, again, thank you for your responses.
Of course, I'm happy to do it. This was very fun, and I'm excited to see what else you guys do because it's such a cool topic. And I think what you're doing really cool about bringing different, in a way, you're inspiring this interdisciplinary work, which I think a lot of great things will come from it. So thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Alex. We really
Of
appreciate
course.
you.
Yeah,
Alrighty, I'm gonna end this recording in this meeting. Thank you so much for all who tuned in to this episode. Keep an eye out for future episodes. And yeah, keep an eye out for Alex's future work. He's gonna make it big. All right.
all
Bye,
righty. Bye-bye.
everybody.
Thank you.